Once upon a time, deep within a dense forest, there lived a witch named Elisa who spent her days in solitude. One day, while she was idly pondering what kind of bizarre, abracadabra mischief to conjure up to pass the time, her eyes were suddenly drawn to a faint glimmer of light coming from a nearby bush. As she approached, she discovered a newborn human baby, abandoned for some unknown reason in this desolate place. What startled Elisa even more was that the child's body reacted strangely to magical energy. Before she could make sense of it, the infant let out a soft sound, making Elisa jump. Then the baby smiled, reaching out with tiny fingers to grasp her hand tightly. At that moment, Elisa made her decision. She would raise this child. The years flew by like a dog sprinting across a field. That tiny baby had now blossomed into a graceful young maiden, her figure clearly taking shape. Elisa and her daughter were inseparable, like shadow and form, yet the changes in her daughter's body sometimes weighed heavily on Elisa. She had named the girl Viola, and now Viola had just turned 16. As for Elisa, despite her petite and youthful appearance, she was in fact a fully licensed witch, already 223 years old. One day, Viola insisted that her mother buy her a gemstone to summon a phoenix. Elisa flatly refused, since the last time Viola had managed to call forth a raging volcano dragon. Unwilling to back down, Viola threw herself on the ground, bursting into tears and wailing until she got her way. Faced with the scene, and the stares of onlookers, Elisa reluctantly took her daughter to their usual shop run by Lyra. The shopkeeper, long familiar with Viola's stubborn streak, wasn't surprised in the least. Lyra even warned Elisa that Viola was entering her rebellious years, and she'd better be ready. But Elisa dismissed it, believing her daughter was still too immature to know anything about love. It wasn't until Lyra spelled it out that she realized, for humans, 16 was already more than old enough for romance. Meanwhile, Viola was overjoyed to have finally chosen her favorite stone. Elisa, however, began to think she needed to be stricter with her daughter. Still, the moment she saw that sweet smile, all resolve melted away. Afterward, the two stopped by a diner and ordered chicken sandwiches. Two young men noticed Viola's beauty and immediately tried to strike up a conversation. Elisa's face turned red as she overheard, worried that her daughter might already be interested in romance. Viola, on the other hand, thought the boys were checking out her mother, and was already plotting to snip off their quail eggs for use in a spell. During the meal, another young man came forward with flowers to confess his feelings, but Viola bluntly rejected him. Watching this, Elisa finally asked her daughter what she thought of love. Viola replied that she only worried her mother was too cute, and might get tricked by someone. Elisa laughed, saying she wasn't nearly that charming, but Viola only grew more anxious, fearing one day her mother might actually get fooled and locked away in someone's basement. When they returned home, Elisa's two longtime witch friends, Guriko, 220 years old, with violet hair covering her face, and Luna, 221 years old, stopped by for a visit. Elisa proudly showed off her beloved daughter, even boasting she would gladly spend all her savings on Viola, which made her friends burst out laughing. Still, Guriko and Luna reminded her that if Viola truly wished, it was only natural she'd soon find a boyfriend, and eventually drift away from her mother's embrace. At that moment, Viola came running in, gleefully announcing she had summoned a phoenix, though it looked more like a plucked chicken. Seeing this, Guriko and Luna shook their heads and silently vowed to remain single for another 50 years. In the midst of the laughter, Viola suddenly rushed to hug her mother, unwilling to let anyone bully Elisa. The sight made Guriko and Luna recall how, 13 years earlier, Viola, still a tiny child, had teased her mother about her flat chest. Now, Viola had already outgrown her. After the two friends flew off on their brooms, Elisa seriously asked her daughter whether she wanted a boyfriend. Viola firmly said she'd never cared about such things. Instead, she often thought about her mother finding someone, and schemed to wipe out any man who dared approach her. Hearing this, Viola suddenly panicked, wondering if her mother already had someone in mind. She burst into tears, clinging tightly to Elisa, even proposing to set up a magic array to conjure a fake dad if her mother ever felt lonely. Elisa gently reassured her. She had never once thought about romance, as long as the two of them were together. That was happiness enough. Those words brought tears even to the phoenix and the household golem. When Elisa offered her hand for her daughter to hold, just like the first day they met 16 years ago, both were overcome with emotion. Though friends had warned her that raising Viola wouldn't be easy, Elisa remained firmly convinced she could shoulder the responsibility of motherhood. The next morning, Viola asked her mother if she could keep a summoned creature, as she had recently become fascinated with summoning spells. But instead of choosing a normal animal, she insisted on keeping the silly-faced phoenix. Of course, Elisa flatly refused. Creatures like dragons or hybrid phoenixes were strictly forbidden in the house. She suggested her daughter pick something familiar and easier to care for, like a cat. The idea excited Elisa, since cats were soft and adorable. But Viola immediately rejected it. She didn't want to share her mother's affection with any other creature. Not even a cat. Still, Elisa pressed on, declaring that cats were unbeatable in cuteness. Seeing her mother's fondness for all things soft and fluffy, Viola quickly boasted that she herself had plenty of softness to offer. Returning to the topic, Elisa explained that witches typically kept owls or cats as familiars. Viola refused again, afraid they would steal her mother's love, so she drew a bizarre-looking monster instead, something Elisa could never possibly adore. When pressed to specify what kind of creature she wanted, Viola thought for a moment and declared, it had to be muscular. Six-packed, well-endowed, and able to shoot lasers. Elisa nearly fainted, urging her to lower her standards. In the end, Viola settled on a monster that could shoot lasers. At least. As the discussion went on, Viola curiously asked about her mother's friends' familiars. Elisa explained. Guriko had a snake, while Luna kept a bunch of men obsessed with BDSM, who followed her entirely willingly. Later, Viola asked why her mother didn't have a familiar of her own. Elisa smiled and said familiars were meant to be companions. But she already had her daughter, so what more could she need? Hearing this, Viola eagerly declared she would destroy any man who dared to flirt with her mother. Elisa then reminded her seriously that raising a living being was an enormous responsibility. And she must think carefully. The following day, Viola proudly showed her mother a flower sprout she had planted. She had taken her mother's advice to heart, choosing to practice by raising a plant first. For soil, she had even used earth from the golem, her stone dad. Elisa believed in her daughter and supported her wholeheartedly. While they were about to go for tea, they noticed the silly phoenix standing gloomily at the door, feeling like nothing more than a temporary pet. Not wanting to risk complaints from the Magical Creature Protection Guild, they decided to keep it after all. In the days that followed, the phoenix grew jealous whenever Viola tended to her plant. It would summon rain to show off, even stretching its neck to prove its height. Though annoying, Viola put up with it since they had chosen to keep it. But one day, it suddenly burst into flames, nearly setting the plant ablaze, until Viola quickly doused it with magic. Just then, Elisa returned from the market, tripping and dropping a cucumber. The phoenix, at the sight of the cucumber, panicked exactly like a startled cat. That afternoon, Luna and Guriko visited again. From outside, they could already smell the delicious aroma of tea and pastries. Elisa invited them in, but Luna hesitated, as she had brought along her grotesque familiars, Ken the pain enthusiast, Ruberetto the masochist fanatic, and Rick the humiliation lover. At the mention, Elisa went pale and quickly waved them all away. Luna had no choice but to open a portal and send the creepy bunch home. Meanwhile, Guriko presented her gift, a memory grimoire. By channeling magic into it, one could relive past memories. Hearing this, Viola immediately begged to see her mother's childhood. Luna obliged, and an image of little Elisa appeared, adorable, like a cute cheese stick. Viola grew anxious at once. Fearing her young mother might have been kidnapped and trafficked, Luna smacked her on the head, telling her to stop watching so many movies. Viola insisted that if it had been her, she would have clad her mother in spiky armor for protection. Coincidentally, little Elisa had once thought the same. Guriko then showed a whole series of photos spanning their years together. One showed Luna practicing tarot, as her family had a tradition of fortune-telling, ironically, the same path that had led her into her body SM profession. Guriko had been obsessed with crafting magical tools since childhood, now even experimenting with something called the terrifying conch shell, blow it. And it mimicked the cry of a black cat. As for Elisa, she had always loved tending plants, and she had followed that passion into adulthood. Hearing all this, Viola was full of admiration, wishing one day she too could do something meaningful connected to her mother. Luna asked if there was anything Viola loved besides her mother. Without hesitation, she answered, chicken. The phoenix overheard, thinking it was the chosen one. Then it wondered aloud why humans needed to eat at all, instead of living effortlessly without food. Enraged at such nonsense, Guriko almost smacked it for planting foolish ideas in her niece's head. Viola then asked to see what the phoenix looked like when it was young, only to find it looked just as stupid as it did now. Later, Elisa recalled how frail she had been as a child, often relying on Luna and Guriko's help. At times, she was more exhausted from keeping them from causing trouble than from her own weakness. Still, she was grateful for their friendship, especially when it came to caring for her daughter. Seeing the three so close, Viola pouted, refusing to be left out. She asked about the others in the photo, only to learn they were Luna's three familiars. Hearing this, the phoenix panicked and snatched the picture, while Guriko and Luna made a hasty exit, knowing Elisa would soon scold them. For Viola, it turned out to be an unlucky day, not because she learned she was adopted, but because she suddenly came down with a fever. The mushroom doctor was summoned, radiating healing spores, but nothing improved. Viola had always been healthy and rarely sick. Perhaps this time she had simply overexerted herself. She used the excuse of faith heals everything to avoid taking medicine, when in truth she just hated the bitter taste. She complained to the phoenix, but the immortal bird had never been sick and couldn't understand. Eventually, Viola admitted she was ill, even claiming that fever was proof her body was fighting off harmful forces, before collapsing mid-sentence. Elisa cradled her daughter, urging her to rest, and asked what she wanted. Viola requested a snowman, but was given only a bag of ice. When she weakly asked for chicken, the phoenix jumped straight into boiling water, eager to sacrifice itself for soup. Horrified, Elisa pulled it out and went to cook herself. The phoenix advised Viola to sleep, but she refused, fearing her dreams might conjure bizarre things into reality and harm her mother. Bored of lying in bed, she tried to get up, but the phoenix blocked her, even suggesting she drink its blood or mucus to recover, an idea so revolting she nearly vomited. In fact, she did throw up shortly after, calling it magic leakage, which would vanish soon. When Elisa prepared to go buy chicken, Viola forbade it, afraid her mother might get kidnapped alone, and insisted she take the golem dad along. The phoenix, fed up, decided to lull her to sleep with a soft cry, and within seconds, Viola was out. Outside, Lyra was surprised to hear Viola had fallen ill. Elisa, who had been sickly herself as a child, understood well the comfort of being cared for. Lyra casually remarked she had never been sick, and if her son ever caught something, she'd just dump him straight at the hospital. Still, both agreed. All parents want nothing more than for their children to be healthy. At that moment, Lyra noticed the golem shadowing Elisa, its movements ready to smash the skull of anyone who came too close. Meanwhile, in her fevered sleep, memories of her birth mother surfaced in Viola's mind. She jolted awake, wondering what the dream could mean. The next morning, Viola was fully recovered, strong as ever. Ironically, it was now the phoenix's turn to fall ill, bedridden and demanding fried eggs, with both Elisa and Viola fussing over it. Flashback to a morning 10 years ago. Elisa awoke to find the room filled with eels. Little Viola was bawling, insisting she hadn't wet the bed, but judging by the enormous puddle on the floor, there was no hiding it. Elisa quickly soothed her daughter, assuring her she wouldn't be punished. Just then, a water spirit, drawn by Viola's magic, appeared. It instantly cleaned up the puddle and expressed its desire to befriend the girl. During a light meal, Elisa used the chance to teach her daughter about spirits. She explained that countless types of spirits existed, and only by great luck would one encounter them. Excited, Viola flipped through a book, asking about their origins. Elisa explained that spirits were born of natural energy, while the eels Viola had summoned were merely a form of monster. Viola was enchanted by the book of mystical creatures her mother gave her, boasting about legendary beasts and dreaming that one day she could share a home with them. That day, Viola stopped by Aunt Lyra's shop to buy something. What she wanted was poison, the kind that could easily take down an enemy. Lyra could hardly believe her ears. The little girl who once had milk stains on her lips was now old enough to come by poison on her own. Viola grumbled, annoyed that every time they met, her aunt would bring up the past. But Lyra remembered every detail as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. When she first heard that Viola had been abandoned in the forest, she had been so furious she wanted to track down the culprit and give them a beating. Elisa, on the other hand, thought the abandoners must have had their reasons. But Lyra was different. Whatever the reason, she wouldn't mind snapping a few bones along the way. At first, when Elisa said she wanted to raise the child, Lyra even advised her to find another family to take her in. But Viola, though human, carried a vast amount of magic power she couldn't yet control. That was why Elisa firmly took it upon herself to shoulder the responsibility. Hearing that, Lyra softened and decided to help, especially since she had just given birth to a son and could conveniently let Viola share some milk. Recalling this, Lyra laughed, remembering her husband's jealous face when he saw Viola nursing contentedly at his wife's chest. After handing Viola the vial of poison, Lyra began reminiscing about the hardships Elisa had faced raising a child. Caring for a baby left her so frazzled she even went so far as to research a magic spell that could create artificial breast milk. Though Lyra helped when she could, Elisa still worried, because books back then insisted that babies who didn't nurse directly would lack love. Furious, Lyra tore up those useless books with her bare hands and told Elisa that instead of wasting time reading nonsense, she should focus on singing lullabies to her child, because it was the love and devotion in raising them that mattered most. She told Elisa to come to her anytime for childcare advice. Elisa, deeply moved, thanked her and shared how Viola often unconsciously summoned magic in her sleep. Lyra burst out laughing, saying it was no different from bedwetting, something children would simply outgrow. She then taught Elisa how to stop Viola's midnight crying by staring directly into her eyes to grab her attention. But Elisa ignored the advice, preferring to take Viola on nighttime rides on her broom. More than once, she discovered just how strong children could be. Viola once grabbed her mother's hair and kicked hard enough to dislocate her jaw, leaving a gaping hole in the wall. Lyra sympathized deeply, recalling how she herself had nearly kicked her own house down as a baby. Lyra was also curious how Elisa managed housework while caring for a child. Elisa frankly admitted that, being a sorceress, she relied entirely on magic, and compared to ordinary women who raised children with their own hands, she felt worthless. Lyra immediately comforted her, even confessing that she had once been too lazy to cook and ended up eating raw flour. That only made Elisa feel guiltier, thinking herself unfit to be a mother. But Lyra brushed the thought aside, reminding her that Elisa had helped her countless times when she was raising her own baby. Clumsiness didn't matter. There were countless ways to raise a child. After listening to the whole story, Viola could only wonder. So Aunt Lyra was a first-time mother too. Yet she lectured like a seasoned expert. At that very moment, Elisa walked in, asking what the two of them had been saying about her. Seeing the radiant mother and daughter pair, Lyra felt more certain than ever that her friend's decision back then had been the right one. Then Elisa curiously asked about Lyra's son. Delighted, Lyra went to call him down, but he flatly refused, saying he'd stayed up all night binging shows. Lyra stormed upstairs in a fury and gave him a beating, while the sounds of shouting and laughter left both Elisa and Viola dumbfounded. Later came the day of the herb harvest. As usual, a green-skinned elf named Fennel showed up to buy them. He beamed when he saw Elisa, but seconds later wrinkled his nose at the smell of poison from Viola. Flustered, Elisa apologized and asked why. Viola calmly replied that the very first time they met, this man had dared to ask to be her father. Ever since, she had despised Fennel, especially the hungry way he ogled her mother. Elisa sternly told her daughter not to get the wrong idea, because she had always seen Fennel only as a younger brother. But those words cut into Fennel's fragile heart. While Viola smirked with satisfaction, Elisa recalled 100 years ago when Fennel had still been small. Viola immediately boasted that she had been with her mother since birth. Elisa reminisced that Fennel used to be scared of ghosts and needed her to walk him around, while Viola smugly added that she used to get her diapers changed by her mother. Exasperated, Elisa sat them both down for tea. But when pouring, Viola dunked her finger right into Fennel's cup before handing it over. Furious, Elisa punished her by making her brew a new pot. Just as Fennel eagerly raised his cup, Viola flashed a wicked grin. It had all been a ploy to stop him from drinking what she had ruined. Elisa was grateful that Fennel came every month without fail. He himself said it was no trouble, since her herbs always sold well. Even the bizarre mixtures Viola concocted managed to find buyers. At that, the phoenix rushed out, proudly trying to sell clumps of clay it had molded. Viola introduced it as her familiar. Fennel panicked, worried she was bringing more trouble upon Elisa. But Viola reassured him that since parting ways with her dad, she had matured. Fennel fumed, thinking Elisa had remarried, until she quickly explained that the dad was just a golem. His frustration only deepened. Determined to win Elisa's attention once and for all, Fennel tried to impress her. Nervously, he asked what would happen if his arms turned into super cauliflower. Elisa took it seriously and told him to see a doctor. Not at all the impression Fennel had hoped for. Viola butted in, revealing that the only reason she hadn't finished him off was because she knew he was a virgin who couldn't amount to much. Enraged, Fennel tapped her head and teased that she was always being scolded by her mother. Immediately, the phoenix belched fire in warning. Just then, Elisa brought out pastries, only to see Fennel's head jammed inside the bird's beak. Yet his face flushed not from suffocation, but from the fact that he was resting on Elisa's lap. In the end, both Viola and the phoenix got scolded. Though Viola gave him endless grief, Fennel still tried to adapt. After all, he had known her since she was little and was used to her mischief. Elisa was deeply grateful for how kindly he treated Viola, hoping he would continue to look out for her. At once, Fennel's heart pounded again at her beauty. Meanwhile, Viola was secretly plotting new traps to torment him. The next morning, as Fennel left the house, he stumbled upon a little game stall she had set up. She coaxed him to play, but sensing trouble, he tried to slip away, only to get caught in her snare. Viola proudly introduced her game, spirit eel fishing. All you had to do was drop bait and reel in. The rules were simple: catch 3 eels within 3 minutes to win. Fennel wanted to refuse, but when he heard the prize was a secret photo, his eyes lit up. Imagining a picture of Elisa, he gave it his all, but not a single eel bit. Viola mocked him for being pathetic. Then, suddenly, a rare golden eel appeared. Catching it would mean victory. Fired up, Fennel put all his strength into reeling in that precious prize. Unexpectedly, the eel was so strong that it dragged the poor guy along with it. Fennel strained every muscle, clenched his butt for leverage, and pulled, but what he ended up grabbing was the phoenix. Only then did Fennel realize, stunned, that Viola had set him up with a nasty trick that stung like a dog bite. That very day, Viola rolled up her sleeves and eagerly headed into the kitchen, cracking eggs and mixing flour with gusto to show off her baking skills. Once finished, she proudly presented her creation to her mother. Elisa, looking back and forth between the pile of pastries and her daughter's radiant face, was struck speechless, silently wondering why they looked so much like little piles of poop. Viola explained that she had shaped them into worms, though they didn't turn out very well. With no choice, Elisa switched into supportive mom mode, showering her with praise, which made Viola overjoyed. Yet inside, Elisa was riddled with guilt for even thinking her daughter's pastries looked like poop. She kept telling herself they were worms, but there was no denying how much they resembled something unspeakable. Just the thought gave her a headache. Seeing her mother look weary, Viola quickly offered her one to taste. Elisa reasoned that the misunderstanding was due to the color, so she suggested her daughter try making a different style of pastry. So Viola came out with a batch of rainbow poop pastries, bursting with colors, which sent Elisa into uncontrollable laughter. To keep her thoughts from spiraling, she quickly grabbed a pestle and tapped herself repeatedly on the head. Viola wanted to share the pastries with everyone, but Elisa stopped her, noticing her mother's odd behavior. The girl worried there might actually be something wrong with her baking. But Elisa only blamed herself, thinking she was a terrible mother for letting such inappropriate thoughts creep in about her daughter's food. Later, she forced herself to try the pastries, though their bizarre appearance made them hard to swallow. They actually tasted quite good. Viola happily ate them too, and the sight of her daughter munching on poop-shaped pastries sent Elisa into another fit of laughter. Drawn by the smell, the phoenix wandered in, mistaking Elisa for the baker. It even lectured her not to play around with food. After that, the whole family gathered to enjoy the pastries Viola had worked so hard to make. That night, Elisa came to remind her daughter to go to bed on time. But Viola was still absorbed in her book The Adventures of the Black Cat and refused to sleep. So Elisa decided to scare her, warning about the Sandman who would pluck out the eyes of children who didn't sleep early. But Viola knew her mother was making it up, because the Sandman himself was sitting in the corner of the room, telling her the truth. In reality, he was a sleep fairy, always carrying a bag of sand to sprinkle into people's eyes to make them drowsy. Elisa jumped in shock, never expecting the mythical being to actually be in her room. The Sandman even joked that, if necessary, he could pluck out her eyes as proof. Then he signed an autograph for his little fan Viola. Curious, Elisa asked why he had wandered into their home. With a heavy sigh, the Sandman explained that he had been suffering from insomnia lately, an ironic fate for a sleep fairy. Once, while on the job, he nodded off and fell straight into Viola's room. Since then, she had been reading the Black Cat stories to lull him to sleep. But the more she read, the more awake he became. When Elisa asked why he didn't just use his magic sand, the Sandman confessed he was afraid of becoming addicted. With ordinary people, he used just the right amount. But for himself, he didn't dare. He admitted his insomnia might stem from a fear of death, his wife leaving him, and the toll of diabetes wearing down his kidneys. Viola immediately suggested letting the phoenix blast him with fire to burn away his fear at the root. He politely declined, saying that was the naive idea of a little girl who hadn't yet seen the world. To ease the tension, Elisa offered him a cup of warm milk, but that only irritated him further, reminding him of a former colleague who had poured milk into people's eyes as a way to put them to sleep, nearly ruining his profession. At last, Viola suggested singing a lullaby, and the Sandman readily agreed. But when he lay down, he was so tense he couldn't even close his eyes. He warned them that prolonged insomnia could cause hallucinations and devastate one's health. Not wanting to impose, he planned to leave, but the mother and daughter insisted on helping him. Elisa then brought him to Dr. Mushroom's office, where he received a thorough examination and thoughtful advice. His condition improved significantly, and he gratefully promised to take better care of his health and try to reconcile with his wife. To thank them, he gave them a precious vial of sleep sand, telling them they could sell it to repair their window. When Guriko heard Elisa had obtained sleep sand, she immediately came over, declaring it a rare treasure almost no one possessed. She urged Elisa to guard it carefully, which only added to her stress. That night, Elisa stayed awake, anxiously watching over the vial, waiting for Guriko to arrive and buy it. The next day, Fennel came to collect a chair he had ordered from a hawk tribesman named Jizin. To show his gratitude, Fennel agreed to do him a favor. Without hesitation, Jizin asked him to set him up with a beautiful girlfriend. Since he had been single for over a decade, Fennel teased him, saying he could just mold one out of clay instead. Jizin grew angry and shot back that Fennel was the real coward, too afraid to pursue any woman all this time. The argument went back and forth until Jizin, practically begging, confessed his dream of being dominated by a tall, beautiful, long-haired woman. Cornered, Fennel had no choice but to agree. And the girl he introduced was none other than the prickly Viola. Jizin greeted her shyly, only to be sent flying by a sudden invisible kick, Viola's retaliation for Fennel's stunt without warning her first. In a panic, Fennel pleaded with her to at least try having tea with Jizin, assuring her that if she didn't like him, she could beat him up afterward. Viola was about to refuse, but seeing that Jizin wasn't a bad guy, she agreed. On one condition, Fennel had to admit he was a pathetic, pitiful man who needed women like her to save him. Furious but swallowing his pride, Fennel grudgingly said the words. So, the whole group went out for tea together. No sooner had they sat down than Jizin asked how Fennel managed to be acquainted with such a cute witch. He was reminded that Viola was only 16, and if he made a wrong move, The local police would show up right away. Fennel even warned his friend that if Viola lost her temper, he'd better run for his life or he might not survive. Jizen's face turned pale at the thought. Curious, Viola asked how the two had first met. Fennel explained that he got to know Jizen while shopping for furniture. Immediately, Viola asked if Jizen knew any secrets or weaknesses about him. To Fennel's shock, Jizen wasted no time spilling everything without a shred of loyalty, betraying his buddy in an instant. Since she was rather clumsy herself, Viola secretly envied Jizen's skill with his hands. He, in turn, thought magic users were more impressive and asked how Viola trained. She cheerfully replied that she just poured her mana into her fists and punched the faces off anyone who dared disrespect her. Wide-eyed, Jizen turned to Fennel and asked, "Are all witches this fierce?" Viola was about to summon a man-eating monster to show them, but Fennel quickly stopped her. Jizen then tried asking about her hobbies, but every answer somehow circled back to her mother. He thought she disliked him and was being sarcastic, but Fennel understood and quietly told his friend not to take it personally. Hearing that, Viola happily talked about Elisa's work and how her mother often used magic to help villagers. Mid-sentence, however, her face darkened. She remembered that today she was supposed to go to the library with her mother, not be dragged here by Uncle Fennel. Fennel turned to Jizen and groaned. "See now? Do you get how much I risked my neck to get you a date?" "Bro?" To his dismay, Viola had only been joking all along, but by then Jizen had already fallen head over heels for her, leaving Fennel in a panic. Jizen even said he wanted to meet Elisa once. At that, both mother and daughter witches glared at him, frightening him into quickly clarifying, "Don't worry, I'm not into single moms." But that only made them angrier. Haven't you ever heard the saying, "A woman who's had a child is even more captivating"? Back to the main topic. Viola realized Jizen wasn't a bad guy and agreed to meet him at her place, strictly as new friends. Just then the waiter brought the bill, and their tea time came to an end. Jizen looked a little downhearted since he still hadn't found love, while Fennel comforted him, promising they'd always be brothers for life. But in truth, Fennel's real motive was hoping Viola would get a boyfriend soon and cling less to her mom. Furious to learn his friend's help was really just self-serving. Jizen felt betrayed, yet Fennel refused to give up and kept urging him to boldly pursue Viola. At that very moment, she came back to return his wallet and overheard the whole plan. Terrified, Fennel bolted for his life. Meanwhile, Phoenix and Elisa were busy cooking when Viola returned home with her new friend. Jizen. To himself, Jizen muttered that he didn't stand a chance against the girl, especially after witnessing firsthand how she once flattened Fennel. The next day, Elisa came home with an egg. Viola, however, misunderstood and thought her mother had laid it. Horrified, Elisa quickly explained. It was a lizardfolk egg entrusted to her by Cosita and Mala while they were away. She clarified she hadn't been born from an egg. Viola then guessed her mom must have sprung from a flower, which explained her beauty. Elisa encouraged her daughter to hold the egg, but Viola trembled and barely dared touch it. Though the shell was sturdy, Cosita still worried it might crack, and once wished she could bear children the way humans did. Luckily, lizard folk identify their young by the patterns on the shells, so there's no fear of mixing them up with the neighbors. At that moment, Phoenix appeared, saw the egg, and got flustered, refusing to touch it. Instead, he suggested Viola care for it like an older sister. The girl even asked if they needed to buy diapers. But of course, the egg hadn't hatched yet. Elisa explained that lizardfolk usually soak their eggs in special springs so they hatch healthy. Hearing that, Phoenix's appetite kicked in. He started craving boiled eggs, making Viola glare suspiciously at the greedy bird. Seeing her daughter's growing curiosity, Elisa suggested Viola read to the egg, like parents reading to unborn children. Viola pulled out her mom's childhood photo album to show it to the egg. Phoenix frowned. It can't even open its eyes yet. What's the point? In the end, Elisa switched to showing pictures of Viola herself, leaving the girl speechless. Phoenix then offered to sing for the egg. Viola worried he'd breathe fire, but the bird swore his song brought peace. Too bad anyone who listened for more than 5 minutes would feel dizzy as if drugged. Elisa decided to cradle the egg herself while Viola whispered a wish that it would hatch into a giant lizard like Godzilla. Elisa quickly scolded her to lay off the monster movies. Viola then corrected herself. Fine. It can hatch into anything, even seaweed. That afternoon, the lizardfolk couple came to pick up their egg. Grateful, they gifted Elisa a magma ostrich egg. Elisa mentioned how Viola and Phoenix had helped take care of it. Upon hearing that, Phoenix proudly spread his wings to scare Mala. making her tail twitch nervously. Cosita asked Viola to hold the egg one last time. Though nervous she might drop it, the girl was overjoyed once it was safely in her hands. The next morning, Fennel was thrilled to be invited to Elisa's for lunch, but he immediately stepped into a teleport trap and was dumped into a children's amusement park to make friends. Turns out Viola was still holding a grudge and had plotted revenge, innocently claiming she only wanted Uncle Fennel to have more friends so he wouldn't cling to her mom. As payback for his matchmaking attempt, Viola even found a new friend for him, none other than a giant big-mouthed monster that lunged in for a kiss the moment it saw him. Horrified, Fennel broke out in goosebumps while Viola cheered from the sidelines. "You should accept genuine affection. My mom absolutely hates people who look down on others' feelings." The monster even confessed it loved not just Fennel's waist but also nectar. Leaving them to their heart-to-heart, Viola slipped away. Fennel tried bribing it with the bouquet he'd prepared for Elisa, but still couldn't escape its crushing embrace. Meanwhile, Viola was washing her face when Phoenix burst in, announcing a guest. Spotting a creature with a face shaped like a butt, she smacked it without hesitation. Excited, she rushed to her mother, claiming she had just found someone's lost butt. When she opened her hand, the creature introduced itself as a fairy. Viola didn't believe it. What kind of fairy looked nothing like the ones on TV? Elisa, however, calmly explained that fairies came in all forms. That shattered Viola's image of fairies, leaving her stunned. The creature introduced itself as Hip and asked the mother and daughter to help stop his older brother. Together, they followed him to Lady Anna's estate. The moment they met, Anna grabbed Viola's hand, thinking she was the famous forest witch, only to find out the real deal was the lowly beside her. Anna was surprised they already knew about her garden that refused to bloom. She had tried everything to no avail and begged the witches for help. Offering a gold bar as payment, Elisa agreed to look into it first, since gold's value was dropping anyway. Anna nodded and went to make tea. That's when Hip revealed the truth. His older brother was the reason the flowers wouldn't bloom. Hip guided Elisa and Viola to his brother, calling out for him with no reply, until suddenly, the brother appeared. Viola nearly fainted when she saw 3 butts on his face. He introduced himself as Dig, guardian of the garden. Enraged, Dig beat his younger brother for bringing outsiders. The two fairies fought fiercely. Elisa and Viola hurried to intervene, urging Dig to calm down, wipe his sweat, and talk it out properly. But Dig only grew more irritable, shouting that everything he did was for Anna, and that outsiders couldn't possibly understand. Just then, Anna emerged with a tray of tea, accompanied by her fiancé, Chino. The moment Viola saw Chino, she gawked at Anna's questionable taste in men. The couple announced their plan to marry and move to Chino's hometown. Though Anna still hesitated because of the garden, hearing Chino's bland, uninspiring words, Dig lost his temper and hurled a durian at his face. Alarmed, Elisa pulled everyone inside as the situation escalated. It turned out Dig was holding the garden hostage to stop Anna from marrying. He saw her as family and suspected Chino was just after her wealth. Elisa urged him not to judge by appearances, but Viola agreed with Dig's suspicion and even suggested splitting the couple to solve the issue. Hip explained that he had sought out Elisa precisely because she, as a mother, could understand Dig's feelings and convince him. Viola proposed investigating Chino first. If they found dirt on him, they'd have proof and Dig could paint the garden red with blood. Her plan was to use clairvoyant magic, which required a piece of the target. Dig handed over the durian still stained with Chino's blood. Through it, they glimpsed Chino's life, helping the elderly, saving children, being a wealthy heir with sharp business skills, behaving properly at parties, and, most importantly, truly loving Anna. Everyone was stunned, even Elisa, while Viola and Hip gushed that he was husband material. But Dig remained unconvinced. Elisa empathized, since she herself wasn't ready to let her daughter go. That made Viola tear up. Touched by her mother's love, she advised Dig to express his care for Anna directly rather than causing chaos from the shadows. Just then, Anna returned to check on them. But since ordinary people couldn't see fairies, she only saw Viola talking to herself. Long ago, Dig had silently watched over Anna since childhood, tending the garden with her father. Even when she wept over her father's death, he comforted her by offering a flower. Realizing she'd been somewhat insensitive, Viola felt guilty. Finally, Dig softened and decided to let the garden bloom again. Seeing Viola talking to herself, Anna wondered if she was normal. But Elisa reassured her that her daughter was communicating with spirits, not hallucinating. A few days later, Elisa and Viola visited Dig again. with Phoenix tagging along, fascinated by the rare artificial garden spirits. He speculated their bizarre appearance was due to the garden's owner being obsessed with butts. Anna, on the other hand, had a thing for collarbones. Elisa noted that there were ways for humans to see fairies, but only if Anna consented. Dig recalled guiding her before, but she'd never heard him. Once, when she napped under a tree, he even shifted the branches to shade her. When asked about her feelings, Anna explained that the garden was her father's legacy. Filled with memories, she always felt safe there, as if someone was protecting her, so she believed her father's spirit lingered. Viola was unsettled, knowing the real guardian was Dig, not her late father. Still, Dig chose to bloom the garden while hiding his presence to avoid disappointing her. Viola wanted to convince him otherwise, but Dig stood firm. Moved, Hip hugged his brother tightly. Elisa respected his choice, offering only one final request. Meanwhile, Chino worried that his presence was causing trouble and went to Anna to apologize. She reassured him it didn't matter. At that very moment, petals rained down on them, and the entire garden bloomed in breathtaking beauty. Dig felt joy seeing Anna happy, though the effort drained his energy. Fortunately, Phoenix swooped in to recharge him. Hip effusively thanked Elisa, while Dig, though playing coy, admitted it was thanks to her he could convey his feelings to Anna. As a mother, Elisa understood Dig's heart. Parents always have their own ways of showing love to their children. A few days later, Viola beamed when she received Anna's wedding invitation. Elisa worried that once Anna left, the two spirit brothers would feel lonely, but Viola believed that one day, Anna would see with her own eyes the fairies who had always protected her in silence. At that moment, Fennel rushed like the wind to Elisa's house after hearing that her daughter had been sent out shopping. To his shock, when he flung the door open, he found Jizin inside. Blinded by rage, Fennel socked his friend right in the face. As it turned out, Jizin had only been asked to fix some furniture, but he insisted on staying behind to sabotage the uncle's game. Since he had already promised Viola, Fennel nearly boiled over at the thought of his friend betraying him for a girl. Jizin, in turn, was disappointed that Fennel had shattered the image of elves. He had always admired them for their beauty and mystery, dreaming of visiting their village someday. But Fennel bluntly told him that the village was practically on the brink of extinction, really just a remote backwater where no one ever visited. With all the young folk gone and only a handful of 600-year-old elders left behind. Hearing this, Jizin was crushed, his lifelong dream in ruins. Fennel tried to console him, pointing out that there were still some married noblewomen among the elves. That immediately sent Jizin into a daydream. Imagining graceful elf ladies, Elisa then brought up the Mana Tree, the most important landmark of the elf village. Fennel also loved that place full of memories, once a rendezvous spot for couples, a playground for children, and a resting place for the elderly. But thinking about it more, apart from that tree, the elf village had no other attractions to speak of. Elisa revealed that she had once gone there to study magic, thanks to her parents' acquaintance with Fennel's older brother. Jizin immediately asked if Fennel had an older sister so he could become his brother-in-law. Fennel shot him down. He only had a brother if Jizin wanted. He could try his hand at a sword duel instead. Elisa commented that all elves looked stunning, like paintings come to life. Jizin added that he'd heard a rumor their entire race didn't need to go to the bathroom. Fennel snapped. Don't be ridiculous. No matter how beautiful they are, they still have to go. Just like anyone else. Jizin shoved him out of the room in fury for shattering yet another fantasy. But then both of them froze when they noticed Elisa standing nearby. Face flushed red with embarrassment. To cover the awkwardness, Jizin quickly asked about elf magic. Elisa explained that ordinary witches expended their own mana when casting spells, whereas elves absorbed natural energy, what they called mana. Fennel then warned Jizin that the villagers were very superstitious, and if he ever visited, they'd probably offer him strange drinks in the name of hospitality. Talking about elves wouldn't be complete without mentioning the female archers, famous for being both beautiful and incredibly skilled. Complimented like that, Fennel blushed furiously and confessed, honestly, there was nothing to do in the forest, so I just picked up a bow for fun. After practicing so much, I somehow ended up a master without realizing it. His words sent Jizin into tears again, as yet another cherished fantasy crumbled. In the end, Elisa had to step in to calm the two down. Fennel admitted that he truly loved his homeland, but because outsiders romanticized it so much, he had no choice but to speak the harsh truth. Still, if anyone dared to slander the elves, he would fight them to the bitter end, because in his eyes, only he had the right to. call out his own people. Elisa completely understood the feeling, even confessing that she missed her roots so much she sometimes wanted to return to the elf village. Seizing the chance, Fennel immediately invited her to visit his family. But before he could celebrate, they both felt two ominous killing auras emanating from outside the door. The phoenix instantly blew its whistle in alarm. Just then, Viola returned with the groceries. While Fennel slumped in despair, his plan for a private date with his crush had gone up in smoke. Even so, deep down, he considered it a very significant step forward in their relationship. The next morning, Viola asked her mother to go dig up some sweet potatoes. Since Aunt Lyra's husband had written that this year's harvest was plentiful, they could take as many as they wanted. But, ironically, and these potatoes not only ran around but leapt about like wild animals. The husband's name was Bao, and he had begged Viola to keep it a secret if Lyra found out. He'd be stuck sleeping on the sofa. Recently, his farming had been failing, until Guriko gave him a special potion. Elisa immediately contacted Guriko, who admitted it was a nutrient formula extracted from the screaming tree, and promised to come deal with it. But Bao brushed her off, saying he loved these quirky potatoes too much, they could even reproduce on their own. Seeing persuasion wasn't working, Elisa threatened to tell Lyra. Panicking, Bao unveiled the Excalibur Holy Potato, a tuber that only the chosen one could pull out. Hearing this, Viola was thrilled, finding it far more exciting than digging up ordinary potatoes. As the three of them were still laughing, Bao revealed even stranger potatoes, one that bit its own tail for no reason. A Jewish potato that roasted itself into a fragrant baked treat. And a mermaid potato that needed to be kept in water to stay fresh. When Elisa asked if there were any normal ones, he pointed to a slim potato, which looked cute enough. But when pulled out of the ground, turned into a zombie hand. Staring at the bizarre field, Elisa insisted on calling Guriko over. But Bao begged her not to. These potatoes were the only ones that accepted his love. Viola was so touched she burst into tears, pleading with her mother to spare the field. Just then, Lyra appeared, immediately sniffing out her husband's mischief. To everyone's surprise, she didn't explode, but gently stroked his cheek with a smile. Then, out of nowhere, she pulled up the Excalibur potato herself and used it to lovingly punish her husband, whacking him repeatedly. Thus Bao became the first to experience its legendary power. Finally, Guriko poured an antidote that returned the potato field to normal. Thanks to that, Elisa and her daughter harvested heaps of potatoes, but for the next week, they ate nothing but potatoes for every meal. Yet the trouble didn't stop there. While walking through the garden, Elisa accidentally stepped on a screaming radish that nearly scared her out of her wits. Viola quickly dragged her mother into the shed, because outside, two giant potatoes had begun tearing apart the precious crops. The cause? Viola had accidentally spilled an entire bottle of Guriko's growth serum, mutating the plants. One potato, nicknamed 3 hectares, devoured every other tuber in sight to grow stronger. The other was a centaur potato, blisteringly fast. The two could only wait for them to fight each other, hoping to reap the spoils. But to their shock, the potatoes fused into a single colossal monster that spewed blazing beams of light, much to Viola's delight. In the end, Elisa once again had to summon Guriko to solve the mess. From that day forward, Viola became obsessed with the idea of fusion, constantly trying to force the phoenix to take her potions. The next morning, Bao knocked on his son's door, trying to wake him up, but was ignored. So he pulled out his violin and played a mournful tune so pitiful that the boy shot out of bed and pounded on the door. The kid declared he wouldn't step outside today. That's when Viola was called in to persuade him, since the two of them had a shopping date that morning. But he flatly refused. Viola even guessed wildly whether he'd somehow grown butts all over his body, like the brothers Hip and Dick. Bao suggested they find a more enticing topic to lure him out. To everyone's surprise, Viola then brought up the fact that her own grandparents used to be siblings, which made the boy scream for her to stop. Seeing this, Bao tried tempting him with toast, while Viola whipped out an old photo album of her mother as a child, but neither worked. Finally, she reminded him that back in the day he'd been a timid boy who clung to her constantly. Yet now he'd turned into an otaku shut away in his room. Hearing that, Bao advised his son to treat his girlfriend better, though Viola didn't mind at all, since the two of them had once shared the same milk. The father, riddled with guilt for spoiling his son too much, even offered his own head as penance, which prompted Viola to mention a monster known for stealing nipples, making the atmosphere all the more tense. Viola then tried a witch's spell to open the door. But no matter how hard she tugged, it wouldn't budge because it was a push door, not a pull. Annoyed, she was about to torch the whole thing. But Bao stopped her in a panic. If Lyra found out, both father and son were as good as dead. At this point, time was running short because Lyra was almost home. Viola demanded to know the real reason her friend wouldn't come out, giving him two options: take a punch or take a kick. Uncle Bao advised that forcing people was never good. He then told the fable of the sun and the north wind. The two competed to see who could make a traveler take off his coat. The north wind hastily blew with all its might, but failed. Meanwhile, the sun simply shone warmly, and soon the traveler removed his clothes on his own. Viola, however, took the story literally, summoning a miniature sun that turned the room into a blazing furnace. Terrified, Bao begged her to stop, so she reluctantly called in the phoenix to intervene. The fiery bird scolded the boy, saying that any man who dared cancel a date with a girl wasn't worthy of being a man. The boy, trembling, admitted he was only afraid that if he told the truth, others would laugh at him. Viola flatly declared that anyone who dared laugh at her friend would get their teeth smashed in. Bao was deeply moved by her words. Finally, the boy confessed. The reason he wouldn't go out was because he woke up that morning with his hair sticking up wildly. The moment she heard that, Viola coldly summoned Aunt Lyra to deal with the kid. The result? He took a full combo beating, leaving him battered and bedridden. Bao was baffled at how his son could ditch a date over something so trivial. The boy only admitted that because it was a date with Viola. He was terrified of losing face. Hearing that, Bao's heart soared. His son was finally experiencing the stirrings of love. That afternoon, Elisa was astonished to find her daughter experimenting with potion making. It turned out Viola wanted to create an anti-bedhead elixir for her friend. At the same time, Aunt Cosita's baby lizard egg hatched. Aunt Lyra then invited everyone for a stroll in the park, a place where all the neighborhood moms gathered to gossip and share parenting tips. Just then, an old acquaintance of Lyra's appeared, Lady. Since childhood, Lady had a habit of meddling in other people's lives, constantly annoying Lyra. No sooner had they reunited than Lady, in her swaggering tone, mocked Lyra's muscular build. Outwardly, she spewed sarcastic remarks, but inside, she was utterly captivated by Lyra's radiant charm. As a child, Lady had longed to be close to Lyra, but her sharp tongue meant every attempt at conversation turned into bickering. Now back in town, Lady wanted to mend their relationship, but things didn't look promising. Knowing that Elisa was Lyra's best friend, Lady grew jealous. Viola immediately saw through her intentions and moved in, bristling at anyone daring to set sights on her mother. When the group was about to leave, Lady stopped them, looked Lyra straight in the eye, and brazenly proposed a showdown in the park. Since Lady's group also had moms, the rule was simple: whoever befriended more moms would win. Lyra had no interest in such nonsense, but Lady's taunts riled her into accepting the challenge. Both sides agreed. The losers would be banned from the park forever. The contest was set to begin in 1 hour. Lyra felt guilty for dragging everyone into trouble, but Cosita remained calm, pointing out that Lyra already knew quite a few moms there. Unexpectedly, Lady popped out of the bushes, boasting that she'd have help from her relative in Gion. Hearing this, Cosita grew nervous. Being an introvert herself, Viola encouraged her to start by approaching moms who also had eggs. Conveniently, there was a spider mom, and Cosita immediately tried striking up conversation. Since the contest hinged on the number of acquaintances, she decided to expand the circle. Viola accidentally pointed them toward a group of eerie-looking zombies, scaring them half to death, but it turned out they were actually model fathers who doted on their wives, making them practically immortal. Still, socializing wore Cosita down, so she asked Elisa if she could call her friends for backup. Elisa figured they were probably busy and unlikely to come. Viola considered summoning her pets, but the phoenix was away playing pickleball, and the koala bear was far too dangerous. After some thought, she decided to call out the carnivorous plant and a swarm of worms. Fortunately, they adored children and caused no harm. Lyra took over babysitting duties so Cosita could chat more freely. Meanwhile, Lady seethed with envy that Cosita's baby was being watched by Lyra herself. She swore her team must not lose. At that moment, a little girl begged to see the baby lizard, but her mother refused, since the other side was the rival team. Elisa witnessed everything. When the results were about to be announced, and both sides were ready to kick each other out of the park, Elisa suddenly declared a draw. Her reasoning: while the moms had indeed mingled, They'd forgotten the main purpose, helping their kids make new friends. In the end, none of the children had befriended anyone. Lady wanted to protest, but Elisa affirmed that the children's well-being was what mattered most. So calling it a tie was the right choice. Both Lyra and Lady admitted fault for dragging others into their quarrel. Elisa suggested they shake hands and reconcile, sneaking a wink at Lady, giving her a chance to approach her idol. Grateful, Lady was overjoyed, but just as a spark of affection began to grow, Viola suddenly appeared to block her rival. Lyra reluctantly agreed to a temporary truce, extending her hand to Lady. For the first time, Lady got to touch her idol, so nervous she only managed 2 light pats before blushing furiously and running off. Lyra stormed after her, vowing to get her back, while Lady's heart soared, ecstatic that she'd finally held her beloved's hand. Later, Aunt Luna arrived with a pile of fresh ingredients, asking Elisa to teach her to cook. But Elisa firmly refused, even shocking Viola. Luna pleaded earnestly, while Viola couldn't understand why cooking lessons were such a big deal. Elisa warned her daughter that letting Luna into the kitchen was like turning it into a nuclear test site. Luna hastily promised to compensate for any damages. Luna's family was famous for its powerful witches. But with that came a curse. In her case, it was culinary catastrophe. Being from a wealthy household with personal chefs, she had never cared much. But every now and then, she wanted to try making something herself. To prove it, Luna attempted a simple sandwich, which turned into such a grotesque abomination that no one dared swallow it. Elisa, fearing for her daughter's life, refused to get involved, but Viola, pitying her aunt, agreed to help. Though Luna's bizarre creations were inedible, they turned out useful as rare alchemical ingredients. At first, they tried making salad, but Luna produced a monstrous plant creature too terrifying to eat. Elisa panicked and switched to soup, only for it to morph into a spiky iron trap. Viola even joked about letting Uncle Fennel sit on it, saying he'd be buzzing for days. In the end, Elisa had to supervise directly, managing to produce a dish of minced meat that looked appetizing, until they cut it open and found something equally horrifying inside. So Elisa suggested moving on to dessert pudding. The result was so ugly it was almost transcendent. But when Luna bravely tasted it, she was overjoyed. It was the first time she'd ever made something edible. Encouraged, she tried making cocoa next, confident thanks to her tea brewing skills. Though the food looked grotesque, oddly enough, it was still usable, and even granted superpowers. For instance, Luna's father once sampled one of her dishes and immediately gained the ability to play music with his nipples for 3 whole days and nights. Catching a whiff of the strange aroma, the phoenix flew over to investigate. The gluttonous chicken eagerly agreed to try Luna's cooking. But the moment it swallowed, its whole body lit up and, boom, it exploded. Just like that, it transformed from an orange, toxin-stained phoenix into something resembling a glowing, radioactive green chicken. Elisa immediately realized there had to be a reason why Luna had suddenly decided to cook. She gently pressed her friend, wanting to know why she had gone out of her way to visit. Luna slowly revealed that she had foreseen that person appearing beside Elisa in the near future. Hearing this, Elisa panicked, hugging her friend tightly to confirm it was true. Meanwhile, Viola innocently wondered why today's sandwich looked so weird. Before she could finish the thought, it blew up again, obliterating the entire kitchen. Luckily, Luna reacted in time with magic, so everyone survived unscathed. Sometime later, Viola began noticing her mother acting very strangely since hearing Luna's prediction. What unsettled her even more was that even the phoenix was behaving oddly. In the end, mother and daughter decided to take the fake chicken to the vet. The nurse there merely noted that the cause was probably its bad habit of eating whatever it found. Since the clinic wasn't equipped for mythical beasts, it was sheer luck that Keela, an expert in legendary creatures, seeing the rare phoenix, Keela immediately lunged forward, eager to take it home as a pet. After a preliminary check, she admitted she couldn't determine the cause, and instead suggested dissecting it for research. Set had to restrain his twisted sister and promised to keep a close eye on her. Keela's excitement came from finally getting to study such an incredibly rare species. While Set was still considering tying her up for good, the phoenix intervened, saying it respected her passion for science. Viola, however, panicked, rushing over to check if her fake chicken had been brainwashed. Just as things were settling down, Keela started muttering about which organ she should extract first. To get close to her patient, she feigned friendliness. Elisa had to warn the phoenix not to fall for her charms, lest it lose a kidney in the process. According to Keela's hypothesis, The transformations might have been reactions to mana, so she asked Set to prepare tests, while Viola and her mother were just praising her for working seriously. The woman immediately tried to steal something. Once again, Set had no choice but to tie her up to keep the examination on track. When asked for blood or feathers, the phoenix flatly refused. "I'm a divine beast, not some common chicken you can pluck at will." Viola suddenly remembered that when she had been sick, it had declared she was the chosen one. Hearing this, Keela grew so jealous she teared up, then pulled out a battery of vision and hearing tests. While measuring its heartbeat, the phoenix accidentally fired a blast of energy straight at Keela, who instead begged for another dose. Thrilled by the rush, at the end of the checkup, Keela announced that it was perfectly healthy, then lunged forward to hug it tightly. At that moment, Dr. Mushroom returned, and Set immediately used him as a weapon to smack his sister. Dr. Mushroom hastily apologized, promising compensation so Elisa and her daughter wouldn't sue the clinic for having a perverted doctor. The phoenix tried to smooth things over, saying the thirst for knowledge was a good thing. Since everyone decided to let it slide, Dr. Mushroom offered a free examination. Just as he began, however, the divine beast had to relieve itself. Strangely enough, once it was done, it reverted to normal. In the end, Elisa and Viola wasted half a day for nothing. As for Keela, she shamelessly asked to take the droppings home for research. On the way back, everyone was relieved the phoenix was fine. The only problem was that Keela behaved like a long single woman meeting a handsome man. As they walked, Phoenix Bao suddenly felt a weight on its back. Keela was clinging to it, refusing to let go. Ever since Luna's prophecy about that person, Elisa's attitude had grown increasingly strange, making Viola restless. No matter how much she asked, her mother wouldn't reveal anything. The phoenix suggested asking someone else directly. Viola tried calling Luna, but her aunt claimed she was busy reading the fate of a count addicted to Viatlot lottery tickets. Unwilling to give up, Viola sought out Gariko, but he kept the secret, saying that was what made it exciting. She was about to pester him further but got distracted by his golden scarab beetle showing off its shiny colors. Disappointed, Viola thought of asking Aunt Lyra, but when told to call Fennel, she flatly refused. She didn't want him knowing the secret before she did. In her mind, that person had to be someone connected to her mother, maybe even a lover. She even prepared poisoned gummy bears as a precaution. Aunt Lyra, on the other hand, guessed it might be an old flame or a forbidden romance. Just then, a strange man passed by, overheard them, and stepped in to ask about a witch named Elisa. Seeing his rugged appearance, Viola grew suspicious and was about to sick her gummy bear on him. Instead, the man took her hand and tried to flirt. Aunt Lyra immediately intervened, teaching the scoundrel a lesson. Viola also quickly realized he wasn't her mother's type at all, just some one-sided admirer. To cut things short, she introduced herself as Elisa's daughter. Stunned, the man trembled as he asked who her father was. Viola calmly replied, "It's just the two of us. My dad went out to buy milk and never came back." Upon hearing this, the man fainted in shock. She then ordered her gummy bear to wake him up with a constipation attack. At that moment, Elisa arrived, having been informed by the phoenix. The instant she saw the man, she froze and exclaimed, "Father, why are you here?" Everyone was stunned to learn that the young-looking stranger was actually Elisa's father. Named Ori, he even mistook the phoenix for his son-in-law, to the point of vomiting on the spot. Seeing how youthful he looked, Aunt Lyra couldn't help but ask his age. Ori replied that he was probably over 350 years old but honestly couldn't remember clearly. He turned to ask Viola how old she was to estimate the time. When she answered 16, Ori thought of her as little more than a newborn, though Elisa herself had lived over 200 years. In Ori's eyes, she was still just a child in need of his protection. Aunt Lyra remarked that Elisa had hidden this truth for 16 years, a long time. But for father and daughter, it felt like only a few months. Elisa had planned to introduce Viola to her grandfather but wanted to wait until she was a bit more mature. Fearing she might pick up his bad habits, Ori was a little hurt but admitted she was right. He explained he hadn't contacted his daughter because he'd been on the run, framed for being involved with an official's wife. During his escape, he'd even hospitalized several soldiers, though it was later ruled as self-defense, and the bounty was lifted. Still, Elisa had never looked at him kindly. Ever since she was little, her father had been hot-tempered and violent, always storming into school to beat up anyone who bullied her, even teaching her how to throw a bear punch for self-defense. Elisa, in contrast, only wished for peace and harmony. But her father had always dismissed such ideals. When Luna and Guriko came to visit, Ori got drunk, fishing rod in hand, boasting about gambling. People once thought he'd lost an eye from excessive card games. But in reality, it was because he had jabbed it himself while fooling around. Elisa feared he would be a terrible influence, while Viola thought her grandfather was unbelievably cool. Thrilled by her praise, Ori wanted to gift her an entire castle. The two of them bonded so well. Even their arguments were in sync. Given the complicated family, Ori quickly accepted his granddaughter. Later, Elisa revealed that her mother and father were actually siblings. Shocking Lyra, she quickly clarified that Ori was adopted, not her biological father. Once the truth was clear, everyone felt relieved. Seeing that his daughter was doing well, Ori decided to leave. Elisa was surprised, since normally he would linger to freeload. This time, not wanting to trouble her, he promised to visit another time. Blushing, Elisa admitted it wouldn't be a bother if he stayed and apologized for hiding Viola. Their father-daughter bond was warming when Lyra accidentally mentioned Ori's attempt at flirting with Viola, prompting Elisa to immediately throw him out. That afternoon, Viola grew curious about her grandfather, though a little disappointed her mother hadn't been born from a flower. Elisa explained that her own mother had visited when she was very young, though Viola had no memory of it. Since then, Elisa had never seen her mother again. Meanwhile, Ori, having been thrown out, sadly flew home on his broomstick with an empty stomach. He recalled Viola's face, feeling as if he had seen it somewhere before, but hunger kept him from dwelling on it. The next day, Viola and her mother went out, leaving the Phoenix in charge of the house and of the bear. Ko-Law, as a senior, the Phoenix felt uneasy about the overly energetic cub. Sure enough, the moment it was let loose, it tore through doors and blamed the Phoenix. Naturally, it was subdued instantly. Ko-Law stubbornly refused to give in, insisting on a fight. Thinking it was hungry, the Phoenix baked some bread for it. After gobbling its share, it eyed everyone else's portions, even trying to trade its venom for more food. The Phoenix shut it down without effort. While washing dishes, the Phoenix heard a noise and found Ko-Law stuffed full, wreaking havoc on the roof. With one hand, she grabbed it by the head, ordering it to behave. Ko-Law immediately struck a battle pose. Meeting such defiance, the Phoenix decided to respond in kind. Just then, a sound at the door made it think Viola was back, so it stopped, realizing it had been tricked. The cub threw a tantrum, clawing at the door until the Phoenix had to sing it to sleep. At that moment, Viola and Elisa returned. Elisa was horrified by the wrecked house. Before the Phoenix could explain, Viola scolded it for neglecting Ko-Law. Aggrieved, the Phoenix collapsed in protest. In the days that followed, Elisa tried to appease it with endless snacks, morning, noon, and night, keeping its beak constantly busy. Soon, the Phoenix ballooned into a chubby piglet. Elisa quickly warned her daughter not to mock others for their appearance, but Viola bluntly called it fat anyway. The truth was, Elisa had spoiled it the same way she once spoiled Viola as a child. Finally, Elisa decided they needed a joint weight loss plan. Hearing this, Viola was surprised. Why should her mother diet when she wasn't fat? Elisa reminded her that after turning 100, her figure had become more rounded. The Phoenix vowed to fast for a year. Elisa advised instead a balanced diet and exercise. Just then, Dr. Kilala appeared, introducing an outpatient weight loss program. Half joking, half serious, she said the Phoenix could come to her if it struggled. Curious, Viola asked about safe weight loss methods. Killa suggested the quickest way was surgery. Elisa immediately called for a nurse, making Killa panic and cry that she was only joking. She promised to help earnestly, gaining a little trust. She then asked for samples of the Phoenix's blood and feathers. According to the program, Killa advised cutting down on cakes and switching to nuts and lighter foods. Elisa was startled, wondering how she knew the Phoenix's exact diet. Later, the group went out to exercise. Already exhausted, Killa warned them not to overdo it. They started with light warm-ups before moving on to running. The Phoenix demonstrated, by flying instead of running. During strength training, it did sit-ups, back exercises, and squats with great vigor. When jumping, it moved so fast it created afterimages, leaving Killa in awe. In the swimming portion, it ballooned again from drinking too much water. By evening, the session ended, and Killa prepared personalized training plans for everyone. Viola and Elisa were delighted, while the Phoenix happily thanked her, thinking she just wanted an excuse to touch it, though she had some ulterior motives. Seeing the bond between mother and daughter, Killa resolved to truly help. After a month of steady training and diet, the phoenix slimmed down from a pudgy piglet into a tiny chicken. Seeing this, Elisa had to start fattening it up again. Meanwhile, far away, Jizin decided to bust Ori out of jail to learn the art of seduction. Ori agreed, on condition that Jizin pay his bail. It turned out he had been arrested for gambling fraud. Though luckily his limbs were intact, Fennel warned his friend not to trust such a conman. But in Jizin's eyes, Ori was the ultimate lady killer. Ori even mocked him, belittling him as a virgin, which was particularly humiliating for someone already 100 years old. Jizin immediately knelt, begging to take Ori as his master and learn the secret of never failing with women. Ori casually replied, "Just rely on a handsome face." The answer killed Jizin's enthusiasm, since everyone knew that, when Fennel bragged that his brother was even more dashing, Ori grew furious, determined to show the boys his true skill. He explained that the key to winning a woman's heart wasn't appearance, but learning to put yourself in her shoes. He recalled how he had once been transformed into a woman. His sister had suddenly wanted a younger sister and changed his gender to see how relationships around him would shift. For 2 weeks, living as a girl, Ori experienced every emotion and finally came to understand women's feelings deeply. Fennel was irritated but admitted it made sense, seeing it as a real-life example of empathizing with women. Ori even grabbed his head, threatening to crush it, stressing that in women's eyes, men were like lurking monsters. Because of this, women instinctively stayed on guard. If men wanted them to open up, they had to be gentle and sincere. Hearing this, both Jizin and Fennel nodded, feeling they had learned something valuable. Ori went on to say that during his time as a woman, he had often been mocked and ogled by other men. Of course, he didn't let that slide. He sent the whole bunch straight to the hospital. He concluded that winning over women required going through countless lessons, and advised the two boys to practice gradually what he had just taught them. Curious, Fennel asked, "Do girls usually like being patted on the head?" Ori burst out laughing, saying only rich, handsome guys with six-packs could get away with that. But he added a warning: if either of them dared try it on his daughter, they'd lose their heads for sure. His lessons really did broaden Jizin and Fennel's horizons. Yet right after, Ori suddenly flipped, saying the most important thing was still being handsome and strong in the lower department. To make them understand, he even suggested turning both of them into girls so they could experience a woman's feelings firsthand. Just then, Elisa happened to be making a delivery at the tavern, overheard her father's indecent talk, and exploded with rage. She immediately summoned Kola to pummel the perverted old man without mercy. Even so, Ori completely doted on his granddaughter. Whatever Viola wanted, he gave in, though only after asking Elisa's permission. Elisa, however, was always on high alert, determined to keep her father away from her daughter. Ori lamented that it pained him too, especially since he had nearly blurted out a line of flirtation to his granddaughter. Viola felt guilty about it, since she had once borrowed Kola to chase her grandfather to the bitter end. Setting that aside, Ori cheerfully remarked, "How can you call yourselves family if you haven't fought yet?" Furious, Elisa warned that if he kept spouting nonsense, she'd shove a lump of clay in his mouth. At that moment, Luna and Guriko dropped by to enjoy the family drama. Ori immediately complained that they hadn't told him about Viola, but both had sided with Elisa, keeping the secret because they feared he would be a bad influence. Hearing this, Elisa felt a twinge of guilt. After all, everyone else had known except him. That realization shocked Ori deeply. In his mind, those kids were the real, bad examples, not him, though he had a point. Elisa brushed it aside. Enraged, Ori threatened to summon Fennel and crush him for keeping quiet. Viola was surprised to learn her grandfather was close to Fennel like a brother. But at their very first meeting, Ori threatened that if he didn't show up within 5 minutes, he'd be sent to the grave. Even though Fennel sprinted at full speed, the old man still threatened to bury him alive. Luna and Guriko rushed out, eager to witness the romance drama. Seeing Fennel bullied delighted Viola, forcing Elisa to step in and shield him. Viola even tattled to her grandfather that Fennel had been secretly courting her mother. Ori didn't think much of it. He even praised Fennel as a decent guy, though far too timid with women to make progress. What truly angered him was that Fennel had kept it a secret. So he spilled the beans, recounting how Fennel, Jizin, and another friend once got drunk together and brawled until they were all covered in blood. At that point, Viola suddenly remembered that she had already met Jizin before. Fennel had introduced them and even brought him to her house. This only made Ori more furious, even that virgin boy knew everything before he did. Unable to bear it, the old man collapsed on the floor, burying his face in tears. Elisa, too, grew angry, pointing out that he often met with Fennel's group but rarely bothered visiting his own daughter. He quickly defended himself, saying he had stayed away to avoid dragging her into trouble, while with Fennel's group he didn't care. It was then that Fennel learned Ori had once been a wanted man. Luna assumed it was for murder, but Ori corrected her, it had only been for the false accusation of stealing another man's wife. Guriko asked what his bounty had been, while Fennel simply wished he'd be arrested soon. The whole group descended into a chaotic argument. Meanwhile, Viola grew curious and asked her mother about her grandmother. Seeing Elisa hesitate, the girl assumed her grandmother must be a strange woman. Elisa explained that she was mysterious. Yes, but also deeply loving. Long ago, when she heard that Elisa wanted to adopt Viola, she had blessed her wholeheartedly and urged her to be responsible. Though many might fail at such a task, she believed Elisa could do it. And so, though enigmatic, Viola's grandmother had always cared for her with boundless love. While mother and daughter talked, Ori was being tied to a cross by the group as punishment. When he was finally released, he sobbed pitifully, wanting to ease his curiosity about his granddaughter. Elisa brought out stacks of Viola's childhood photo albums. The three of them pored over the pictures, including one where little Viola was riding a duck but looking far from happy. Her adorable face as a child delighted Ori so much that Luna and Guriko also pulled out odd photos to share. Feeling left out for too long, Ori vented his frustration on Fennel. Luna then recalled that as a child, Viola had been extremely energetic, talking non-stop, even casting spells before she could properly read, nearly giving the two aunts a heart attack. Whenever Elisa was busy, the two had taken care of her, thinking they'd win her affection. But the moment her mother came home, Viola would bolt straight into her arms, abandoning them. Remembering it still made Luna and Guriko bitter, realizing they had only ever been stand-ins. Even so, compared to Fennel, they considered themselves lucky. Whenever he looked after her, Viola rebelled non-stop, tormenting him and even trying to sacrifice him to monsters. Forced to take her on walks, Fennel had once cared for her so well that an old neighbor mistook him for her father. But Viola immediately corrected her. He's a stranger, mistaking him for a kidnapper. The old lady beat him black and blue. Hearing these stories, Ori was reminded of raising Elisa. Unlike Viola, she had been frail and sickly as a child. Worse still, whenever he took her out, soldiers often mistook him for a criminal because of his shady-looking face. Even so, Elisa had always been more mature than her years. When Ori tried to amuse her with inappropriate cloud shapes, she only looked at him with utter disdain, thinking of how Fennel too had been mistaken for a villain when with Viola. Ori laughed gleefully. Indeed, with a thuggish face, being around children only multiplied one's suspiciousness. The phoenix cut in, reminding him to quiet down since it was in the middle of purifying its body. Hearing all these stories about her childhood delighted Viola to no end. In the eyes of her whole family, she would always be their little princess. Ori felt the same, but when he thought about how his daughter had now grown into a model mother, he couldn't help but be amazed. As for the immortal phoenix, to it, they were all still nothing more than newborn babies.